Welcome to Around the Fencepost, where grit meets growth, stories spark change, and real conversations build stronger farms and futures.
Today, I've got somebody on who's out there every day helping producers make sense of the forage systems across the Southeast. His name is Jaden Hardy. He's the new dealer and customer support rep for the region for Southeast Agri-Seeds, and he's got a front row seat to what's happening in pastures right now, what's happening with planting with their forage producers across the Southeast. So we're going to talk about something that's exploding in popularity, which is going to be the summer annual mixtures. Why they're hot, why they work, what producers need to know before they jump into the mixtures versus going with a single crop. Jaden, glad to have you on to talk about this. We've been talking about getting you on, and I was real glad this week worked out for you for making that happen. Welcome to Around the Fence Post.
Yeah, no, appreciate it, Jacob. I was excited to come on. With all the traveling I do, I'm pretty big into podcasts, either ag related or otherwise. But I spend a lot of time listening to podcast information, and I'm excited to discuss some forages. I'm pretty passionate about it, and I enjoy it. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Before we get down into the forage side, let folks know get to know you a little bit. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into kind of this line of work specifically with Southeast, and what pulled you into forage systems, because you were well down that path long before you met Josh Baker?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up about 30 minutes north of Rome here, northwest Georgia, from a small town called Trine. I currently live in Lyerly, close to the family farm. I've always been involved in ag in some form or fashion. My granddad ran some mama cows and then some stockers for a while there in the county, and then he got out of it. I was in high school and college, graduated high school, and then went to ABAC down in South Georgia. Graduated with an ag business and livestock production degree from there. That got the ball rolling because I was passionate about the ag industry. Wanted to go that route in one way or another. I graduated from there, and when I graduated from there, they made you do an internship. So I ended up interning at White Oak Pastures down in Bluffton, Georgia. That helped fuel a little bit more of some regenerative ideas, some things that weren't necessarily covered in the classroom there. And then whenever I graduated from there, I ended up coming back up to northwest Georgia and worked on a seed stock operation for about 2 years in Fort Payne, Alabama. And then found out me and Josh are actually neighbors when it comes to farm property. He's just right down the road from me. Had been after a position like this for a little while, was curious about it for ever since really I graduated college, and then just before Christmas he reached out to me, and the rest is where I'm at right now.
I like it. What's your favorite part so far, 3 months in?
The traveling. I enjoy the traveling. I also like being home. I'm about to be picking up a little herd of my own, so definitely obligations there. But traveling, getting out to see producers that I know, see producers that I don't know, learning from them, all the different ways that, people do their own operations is really neat to see, get out to and just talk to different producers. That's what I like about it. Over at my own family farm, the fuel and passion of forages, of building land, of building a healthy environment for using a tool like livestock to manage is something that I enjoy doing, that I'm passionate about, and so it just kind of goes hand in hand with this opportunity.
Absolutely. I know Josh was really up in the collar when you and Ethan came on down there, and it's been a pleasure meeting you and talking to you a few times, and it definitely helps having some extra knowledgeable hands around the in and out of the business a little bit instead of everything getting bottlenecked sometimes. So that's really exciting for Southeast, and then it makes things easier for me as a dealer. So I'm excited about it from my end as well.
Yeah.
So You mentioned when we were first getting settled in to get this started that you've been taking calls on this really heavy today, but I know it's been like this for about 3 to 4 weeks for you guys, where you're having a lot of conversations about summer annuals. So, if you don't mind, could you give us some background on what a summer annual is, and then we're going to start talking about the individual components and what works well together in which systems, if you don't, if that's the way you want to frame it up.
Sure,
So before we
sure.
start
So
talking about our mixtures.
yeah, so the summer annual to start is going to be your warm season product or forage that's going to be put in around the southeast, usually end of April to May is going to be planting period for a lot of those products, and then they will go to fall. Pretty much will be the full production cycle for them.
Why
Is
are they
what that could
getting?
be either. No, go ahead.
Well, no, I don't want to cut you off in the middle of a thought with that, Jaden. I was just going to say why are we seeing the big demand really seeming to jump so much? And it's been for me in the last 2 to 3 years. I think I've seen more of a jump than I had at any previous point in my dealership career.
Yeah, I think from a producer side looking at it, all this new information and all these new practices, whatever buzzword you want to use, is that soil health idea and incorporating a mixture of warm season annuals is a tool to use to improve your pastures, to improve your grazing, and to improve your soil health overall.
I have a customer down here in West Tennessee, a young guy running and gunning and getting herds of cows popped up on this rental piece of ground or that rental piece of ground. And he called me a couple weeks ago talking about had an opportunity on some land that he was renting the pasture on. And essentially, the landowner who was renting the other row crop ground to a row cropper lost his tenant on. They just said, well, we can't afford to put out corn this year. He reached out to the young man in this situation and said, hey, this piece of this farm just ties right into what you're doing. Would you be willing to pay close to the rent and come in with a different come in and pasture it? Would you be willing to do that? And that's the route that he's going. And I think a lot of guys would be asleep at the wheel if they have a similar type opportunity, if they have some of their own cows. What a great time to give your own pasture at home rest and let that polywire take care of the stock that you've got in the pasture, put them out and get 60 days grazing with the average daily gains that we've seen with these summer annuals.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even from just a production standpoint, I mean, those warm season annual mixtures will be, they'll tolerate some different types of soil. And they'll also establish a little quicker than some of your perennials, especially in the warm season. And then forage quality, especially in a mixture, providing a couple different forages for those cattle or livestock to pick on and gain nutrients and forage quality that kind of complement each other in a mixture and can provide them with a diverse um, variety of forages and nutrients in those. So it's definitely it's a tool to use for a production standpoint and an ADG standpoint, to put some pounds on beef, because pounds on beef is pretty important right now because every pound counts at the sale barn at this point.
Very true. And I thought one of my favorite points I had Chris Leach on from Coffee Seed Company last week. And Chris, one of the things that he had thrown at me was talking about the absolute depth you can get out of your root systems on a sorghum, and how it just is so much available to us to a summer annual that may not be available to a row crop, a type of plant or whatever, to where you can take advantage of that input that you've already put in the field anyway. You may as well capture the gains while cattle are high. And I love that mentality, and I thought it was one of the really like key takeaways. There's a couple on every one of you guys where I make notes after we finish talking, and it's like That was like that sticks with me a little bit. You know what I mean? And that was one of those with Chris. And yeah, I think there is a lot of advantage when you're trying to capture a market that may not be here forever. We want to make sure that as
Mm-hmm.
cattlemen we can maximize it. So we talked. You mentioned about the summer annuals. So you've got, of course, one of the things that make them easier to manage for farmers, especially if you got to make hay or if you're whatever you're doing, if you're feeding cattle off of that acreage anyway. One of the things that really stand out is that they are such a drought tolerant plant, and that's so important. Where 7 out of 10 years we have a drought at one end of the summer or the other in the southeast. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to add to what you were talking about there on that row crop ground. I mean, those sorghum Sudans and everything on dry land versus like on the row crop side, they're going to handle a lot more drought stress and problems than some of those other products, especially on the row crop side. So incorporating that and it taking advantage of the market is definitely a good way to look at it. And I mean, right now, great weather. I'm glad to see the cold snaps leaving, but we're pretty dry even at this point in the year, especially for the spring. At least around here we are. I mean, and we don't have really any projected rain for a good little bit. So hopefully we're getting some more moisture, but it's definitely got to be thinking about that because it can and will happen. And those warm season annuals can mitigate some of those problems, especially when you're looking at forages.
So we've obviously got with multiple options there. We've got everything in this conversation from full on grazing corn to teff grass, and that doesn't even take into account for the forage sorghums, the millets, all those different options. And you've got the one cut, you've got the multiple cut, and if just depends on what you want to do. So we've got that wide across an industry, not just at Southeast, but across the industry, we have such a wide variety of options. Not the extremes that you would see in different parts of the country, but we have a really wide variety of options. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about a bit today is because we're talking about annuals. Would you mind talking about the annuals that are typically the secondary part of the mixture, your cowpeas, your forage soybeans, all those that are almost the secondary part, and that piece as far as that side? Go ahead.
Sure, yeah. I mean, talking to producers, and I'm always trying to think from a producer's mindset, especially when trying to come up with these mixtures. And what I try to go with is everybody's different. Everybody's got different goals and everybody's got different ideas. And it's trying to align something that will work with your goals and something that will work with your operation. Because at the end of the day, everybody's different. Everybody's got a different goal. Everybody wants a certain output of these products, and that's where the mixtures can come into play. So iron clay cowpeas is a good secondary source. Sun hemp, seeing a lot of those products as that second and third option with that warm season grass, either pearl millet, sorghum Sudan grass, but mainly those sorghum Sudans and pearl millets. Depending on if you're worried about prussic acid, pearl millets, you don't have to worry about that there. But some of those products, let's see, a lot of it's going to be that forage grass, sun hemp cowpeas. Seeing a lot of that, that's a pretty popular start. And then depending on how diverse you want to go into that, you go off of that.
I like that, and I had added some to a mix the other day, or had talked someone into a specific mix based on the regrowth factor for the sun hemp, that was supposed to be the most aggressive of anything on regrowth, and just trying to be cognizant of that based on what they're planting it as a companion crop with. That's one of those, I think, I'm sure you guys at a different scale, obviously with me out here, but you guys with a very different scale. But so many of these questions that we just have to start with: what's
Mm-hmm.
the intention? Where are we going with this field? Just so we have an idea of what is the X we're solving for. And that was in that instance with the sun hemp, was saying, hey, you want a multiple cut system or a multiple grazing system. We need to make sure that we are creating a mix that is going to be sustained with you, because if 30% of your seed just decides to fizzle out after you harvest it at one time, you're not going to be very happy with your salesman.
Yeah, that's the fun part, especially like a sun hemp, because I've had those conversations in the office of, have you planted sun hemp before? Like all of these mixtures we can come up with, yeah, that sounds great, but the truth of it is, what does it look like in your pasture? Well, how are you managing it? When are you grazing it? How are you grazing it? A lot of these mixtures go really well with a rotational grazing or a time grazing, something like that. If you're running stocker calves, getting them, bouncing them around, versus if you've got a cow calf operation. All of these things, or all these conversations in a custom mix or just a regular mix, a stock mix, that you have to have in order, because you're trying your best to match that producer and his goals with the correct mixture. And that can take a lot of conversations, a lot of questions of, have you had experiences with these products? What's your management strategy? How soon are you going to have this livestock, starting to graze on it, and how do you usually manage it? Are all questions that play a big factor into going with it. I mean, are you soil health focused? Are you forage tonnage and production focused? Do you want a little bit of both? And then going off of that and just the baseline to get something right.
So are you? And maybe I should jump into this one in a second. But what's the main reason people tell you that they're trying them? Are these more people that haven't tried them before come calling the overall calling room and asking that, or are these people that have already done at least some experimentals with them and are now more committed?
Yeah, I think it's a good mix of those questions. A lot of those producers that call that have tried a certain mixture, most of the time they're calling back to either get that again or add to it, that they're having that success. But I would say a lot of those calls are coming from either a soil health perspective, or incorporating those warm season mixtures to add forage quality and that for their livestock to boost that, especially with what the market environment is at the time. And there's a lot of people that want to try it, and the producers that want to try it are the ones that narrowing down and having those questions. And that's the part that I enjoy a lot, is getting something together that both sides are confident in and saying, let's go with it and see how it goes. And those mixtures, I'm trying to have those conversations with producers to be back and forth. And what's the feedback? What are you seeing? Can I get out there and look at it? And because that's how we come up with these mixtures and are confident in these mixtures.
So let's break it down then. When we get into the summer annual mix, what are we like? And I know what I recommend, if depending on what you're grazing, or you have the single cut option, which I still, 30 years after the first time we tried it, or 26, whatever, I still am a fan of forage sorghum, which that has obviously improved a lot over 25 years. But that mixed with forage soybean, I still think is a heck of a heavy tonnage crop, and you're looking at a lot lower inputs. But when we talk about a summer annual mix, let's say for grazing, let's say for a cover crop, what's actually in it? What is it? What are those components bringing to the table in that mix?
Yeah, so we've touched on like the warm season grasses. They're gonna provide the tonnage. They're gonna provide a good root system, and then they're gonna be weighted to be complemented by your legumes. So that's gonna be the cowpeas, the sun hemp, lespedeza. You can go through there, and they're gonna be fixing that nitrogen as they come up to mature, and then you can incorporate other. You can go. I had a 10-way mix that we worked on. It was a super diverse mix. You had crabgrass in there for ground cover. It was a broadcast mix. I mean, and it was a fun conversation to have because it was somebody that had an open mind, wanted to try it, and then improve on it next year. And those are fun ones because it's a lot and it's a diverse mix and it's a really cool process. But you can, if you want more soil health, then you could go, radishes, buckwheat. If you're wanting to pull nutrients up and hold them closer for some of those forages up in the top layer of your soil. I mean, you can do a lot of different things with those mixtures. It's just going down the line and figuring out what all your goal is, and then incorporating those seeding rates, the pounds, and getting into that. And that's the next step of how those forages complement each other and how to make it in a mix that actually makes sense and works.
100% agree. And going into that, I think one of the things that as a younger dealer, I was more often, and I won't say because I still a lot of perennial mixes that I like tweaking a little bit my own, whether it's just from seeing results or just a preferential thing for me, whatever the case may be. These summer annuals, sometimes that is a lot of fun doing those 10 ways. You get somebody a lot of times, and not, we're getting into the mixing species idea. The thing with the ones that are on factory settings is, it's already been looked at by somebody smarter than me or anybody else, because you've got collaborative minds being involved. I don't mean to be putting myself down in that, because that's not what I mean, or anybody else that answers the phone. I'm not saying
No, for sure.
anything there,
For sure.
but there is a lot of positives too. Hey, there's a reason, and sometimes it's as innocuous as the soil size or the seed size, as far as, okay, what's the most convenient way to mix this and plant this. There are different things like that are just as, that's the only reason that, hey, we don't love this mix because of blank or something in that ballpark. But while we're on the mixes, let's talk about the advantage of the mixtures over these single crop or monoculture fields.
Yeah, so there's definitely advantages to that. I would say in a grazing setting, it can be an advantage into like you were talking about with the soybeans, a mixture for cutting. But the more diverse you get, the different dry times you get, depending on if you're doing dry hay or if you're wrapping it. So those ideas are there. But in a grazing setting, you've got your monoculture, it's there, but then once you start adding different forages, different varieties, different species that complement each other, then you're not only adding different avenues for that animal to get the nutrients it needs, but also you got to think of what's happening under the ground. And different forages play different roles in the soil, communicating with the microorganisms in there and bouncing off, pulling this nutrient, putting this nutrient in, and their exchange within the soil is a deep dive in it. But if you want to improve that soil, which in turns improve your forage, which in turns improves your livestock, you got to start at the bottom and work up. And I think that the warm season mixtures is a good way to not only do that, but we've had a lot of success with producers doing that rotation for a little while and then going into that perennial and establishing that. And that warm season mixture jump starts that soil and gets that soil working to where that establishment of that Bahia grass, Bermuda grass just kicks off and has a lot of success.
That is an overlooked avenue jumpstarting your warm season perennials with that as well. I do that some. Obviously, everybody's familiar with doing nurse crops on their winter annuals. It's not as talked about. So I like that you just touched that pretty good. That's yeah. There's so much to be said for it to allow that protection. One of the other subjects that I wanted, or topics I wanted to make sure we hit, because I absolutely enjoyed and got a lot from our dealer training there, that the fescue toxicosis, and this is a subject I've gotten excited about for I don't know, a good while. I try to keep up with it, and I was still had some takeaways and some ideas in there with utilizing, with planting your crabgrasses and stuff through your perennial pastures, if it was a K31 field, or if it was even to protect your novel endophytes, but simply to keep them from getting overgrazed during the course of the summer. That's something that we're starting to see more people interested in, putting 2 to 3 pounds of crabgrass out on top of or mixed with a perennial grass to allow for uh, having some summer growth happening during those hot months of June, July, August, and then of course till September. We're hoping it's raining and cooling off a little bit.
Mhm.
But do you have anything further you want to add to that? Because I find that topic, the fact that it's starting to get talked about in the um, hallowed halls of education,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
kind of gives me some validity in what I've been talking to people about for 3, 4, 5 years at this point.
Yeah, sure. I mean that diversity, like that crabgrass in there, helping the novel endophyte fescue, especially go through those warmer seasons, going through the summer, standing that heat and standing that grazing pressure. I mean, that dealer training was really good information on fescue toxicosis and how to manage it with diversity, with blending it in with other forages, and also how to truly manage that novel endophyte, because it does take different management than that Kentucky 31 for a number of reasons. But I would say diversity in general with that, and just your warm seasons, that those different forages bounce off each other, and it gives that animal options to pick and choose and not hammer down on just like the monoculture setting. And you can see improved grazing even in a continuous graze standpoint. But one key is like those millets, the Sudan, the sorghum Sudan, like in those mixtures, and even just by itself, you're putting that in the ground, but you got to give it a little time. You got to let that forage in a grazing set and get up to 18, 20 inches if you want good regrowth and good production out of it. But once you start, if you can let it get there, and you can let that forage get up and go through it, then you can see a lot of success. But coming back to the fescue and incorporating other things to help it out, it will definitely help, especially on the novel endophyte side.
It just allows so much more versatility in a growing year. And again, we don't sell. This is a bit of my background with dad being a dealer back in the 90s up in Maryland. He'd have disgruntled customers. It'd be a drought year, and there'd be a couple of people just kind of about seed not growing. And he started saying then, and he still every year that somebody calls me and kind of is like, well, it didn't grow as well. Well, there's a thing he put, and I ought to start tagging it into the bottom of my invoices, but it says we don't sell rain. And it's just
That's exactly right.
it's hard. It's hard to speak to that. It's hard for us because we're producers first, and then we're selling seed. You're talking about buying a herd. Josh has got his young cows. Most dealers have some such close ties to ag that we've got our own cattle, and then when we look at it, we're like, yeah, we know we're in the same year you are. We're so sorry. It's hard, but when you can, assuming you get rain, when you can put all these things in different systems, and you're able to do keep a portion. And I was asked that question not very long ago. Even yesterday, my driver asked me that about when we were door knocking down in Savannah yesterday, and my driver's like, "Well, why doesn't everybody have a field that they're able to graze?" And I was like, "Well, some of it depends on their rotation." And we had a little bit of a good little chuckle over it. He knows this stuff, but he is in a really good position on his farm. His is understocked for what his farm could handle, and he wasn't
Yep.
he wasn't in a position to add cows until he was in a position to add cows, and now he's the other way. So it's in a great spot for him, and I love that. But when I'm sitting here trying to explain, hey, if we could run annuals on 25% of the farm and perennials on 75, all of a sudden we've made life a lot easier for what we're doing. And I think, and then when you're able to start talking about adding those annuals to the perennials, whether and again, going back to going both ways with it, I have people with Bermuda and people with Bahia that will put ryegrass through those and graze them, as I'm sure you know several. And it works. It works.
Yeah.
But going back to our summer annuals, because I'll find a squirrel and chase it once in a while, in case you haven't figured that out yet, Jaden.
Yeah.
The back on the mixtures or the summer annual blends and all those things, obviously they're hot. Everybody's wanting to do them. They're wanting to fix the soil. They're wanting to get that average daily gain up through the roof. And they're most of all wanting some good tonnage. And then you've got the rest of us that was burned by drought and just want to make sure that we're able to grow some quality feed in a heck of a hurry. What are the most common mistakes you see made?
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, I'll get to that, but then on my side, like I'm going to be understocked, and that gives you an advantage as far as what you can do with that forage and what that forage can handle. But like you were saying, everybody's different and everybody's got their own situation. So you can go about it different ways on that. Just depends on where you're at with that. On drought and environment, like you said, we don't sell rain. I try to tell people, establishment, timing it with moisture, everything else like that. But at the end of the day, we can only control what we can control. But it's, well, I got off on a squirrel there. Remind me of the question again, because I was going on a tangent.
You're 100% good. Yeah, I was just asking about the most common mistakes that producers will make and then be frustrated with.
Yeah, so definitely, I touched on it a little bit, but grazing on those warm season annuals. I understand, like this past fall, super dry. We've had a lot of people call up like, I need some forage. I need some forage. It happens, and I understand it from everybody's perspective. Like, why try to plant that this fall whenever it probably was not going to have a whole lot of success? But then you turn around and you're short on it now, and so whenever you go to graze it, it's like I don't have any hay left. I don't, and I understand it, but timing that grazing and letting those warm season mixtures get up to the right height and stay at the right height to give you the proper production for the entire summer is one thing, because you might have some of those mixtures that are diverse and have that lower growth, except under that millet, sun hemp, sorghum Sudan. But if you hit that stuff early and don't let it get up and start working, then that regrowth is going to struggle. And if you put that mixture out and then just start hammering down on it, then you're not giving it much of a chance. So I would say that would be one. Calibrate your drill properly, because that can be a depth. I'm running the depth. Get the depth right. Understand where your drill is, because putting these mixtures in, you're putting that money in the ground. So let's ensure that it's done the right way, for sure. And then I would say another one that kind of goes along with the first point would be timing, because there's some producers that, let's do it now. Let's get going now. And I get it. We need grass in a lot of situations, depending on where you're at. I mean, forage is needed. It was either short, not the best quality, whatever it might be. But some of those, especially you get closer on that more perennial side. I know we're talking about annuals, but that cold can be a problem in some of those, and we're still on the edge of maybe running a risk into running into it. Timing that, and like I said, with moisture especially. But going into the mindset of those mixtures with let's do it, let's give it a shot, but it might not exactly look like what we've got in our head, and that's the part of mixtures, especially the stock mixtures are pretty stout. A lot of success with them, but once you get on the custom mixing side, we're going to work with you, ask those questions to give you the best possible result that we are confident that's going to happen. But at the end of the day, that feedback and what's in the hayfield, what's in the pasture is vital, and that feedback and seeing how those actually complemented each other and how that worked. So it's a back and forth between producer and us on some of those, and having that good conversation helps both parties out, I would say.
100% level setting those expectations really makes a difference. I'd touch on two other parts on that just because I thought of them while you were running through, but talking about the things, and you had a great call out for calibrating your drill. And I mentioned that about whether mixes work and seed sizes well together, and that's such a big part of it with making sure your drill is set up the right way. Keep telling Josh he needs to buy a new one, and let me rent that one he's got out to people. But the other thing I would say, because I've had a lot of conversations on the subject, is if you're mechanical harvesting, make sure you're leaving enough stubble. And if you're
Yep.
putting cows on it, make sure you're walking that field and checking, because cows are funky. They'll eat something to the ground in one corner, and the rest of it you think they're walking through it up at their knees, and you might have a half your field that you're not going to get a regrowth on because they've been rubbing their noses for a couple weeks. So I think that plays in, and it's probably been, as a younger, it's been years since I've had this come up, but as a younger dealer, it was one of the things that I had to most speak to when people would call and be like, "Hey, this isn't coming back like I expected," and I'd be over here like, "No, how low'd you mow it?"
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I go off that. That's an interesting part because livestock are peculiar sometimes. They make the weirdest decisions on grazing, especially, and that's why a lot of these mixes can work really well, especially in a rotational setting when there's a plan to that grazing, when they're a tool on that forage. But even then, you can see, and that's the part of those mixtures. Sometimes they'll eat, these forages. Sometimes they'll leave those alone. Those brassicas sometimes take a little longer for them to turn around on. So it's just, but that can also give you, if you can manage that can give you a little bit longer of a grazing on those mixtures. Is they might take off some of those annuals and graze those down, and then you can come back and clean it up if that's an option.
Yeah, that's a good piece of observation, because sometimes it does work that way. I want to touch on one more thing before I ask you your wrap up, or before I ask you some wrap up stuff. And that was just like the summer solar. I think that one is a fascinating blend just because of the amount of sunlight that you're getting so much stuff just pumped into the soil with this. And I just think it's incredible. And there is a Bayer Monsanto deal not very far from here, and one of their people once in a while comes and gets stuff for them where they have to do whatever to stay in compliance with whatever their agreements is with the government and all that stuff. So whatever. Anyway, he did
Hmm.
some summer solar one year and sent me pictures at the end of the summer. And this stuff was 6 feet over the top of the tractor. Just some
Yeah.
incredible tonnage that they got off of it. And I think they were trying to be, what was it, carbon neutral or whatever. So I got to pick at him and ask if it's carbon neutral for that year. with that much biomass. But that's been a few years ago, but I still like that picture. I still would dig it out anytime somebody's even talking about it. But just to reiterate, if you're going to use that anywhere near a cow pasture, you need to dilute it with something.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Those are the conversations and the feedback to understand because on those mixtures, a lot of producers either haven't ran across some of those products but want to try it. And might not have experience with it. And it's those pictures, it's those conversations with producers. Those mixtures can take off and go, especially depending on what products you have, and it can be like, whoa, now I can't stay on top of it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can take some different management, and that tonnage can sometimes surprise people.
Yeah, I think I'd say it's a great call out. Where do you see the future of your of summer annuals? You know what, you and Josh have got to what two new over the last couple of years have come out for mixes. So we're continuing, it seems like, to expand the options for your summer annual mixes. Are these going to, or are you anticipating that we continue to see more and more producers using them? And I didn't get into this, and I probably don't have time to, so I guess I better let it be. But do you think they're just having their moment, or do you think they're going to be a core tool for producers, not just in the southeast, but across the U.S.? We're seeing the rise of different cocktail mixes, just
Hmm.
obviously different ingredients based on what climate they're in.
Yeah, I think from a producer's perspective and managing your livestock and managing your environment and your pastures, that we're going to continue to see those mixtures just keep picking up speed. And with more and more producers using those products, giving the feedback, seeing what works in the pasture with this situation or these animals or these forages, that all that feedback is just going to help refine those mixes, refine those products, and refine the ideas, because that's the goal of all of them, for us at least, is that product in the pasture or in the hayfield, and how that producer's feeling about it. But as we go on, I believe that those mixtures will continue to pick up speed. And I think we could see adding some different ones. I've slightly jumped into trying to find over the years the custom mixtures that we've worked on that might be very similar. It might have been the same thing that was done 5 times, and seeing stuff like that and where some of those are at to just make another stock mix or anything like that. But I think they're going to continue to keep the ball rolling, because the more and more conversations I have with people, I would say that the majority of those conversations are positive reactions, positive experience. They might be tweaking it one way or another, but they're still going in that direction. And they're seeing a lot of good results within their soil, within their livestock, and their just production in general. So I think it's going to be good.
All right, Jaden, last thing. So if a producer is listening to this and thinking about trying summer annuals for the first time, they're going to call Southeast, and you're telling him to call me, or he calls me and I deal with it. What is the one piece of advice you want them to walk away with? What do you want someone that's listening to this to take away today?
I would say know what your goals are and look to fit your operation, because everybody's different and everybody has their own way of managing and producing, and we want to make sure that matches you, because that in turn, that's what's going to do the best for your operation and for those animals. Know where you're at and what you're wanting to do with it, and go with it. It's not a cover all. Those mixtures cover a lot of different things, but we're trying to get what is going to work for you, and everybody's different. So I would just say know where you're at and know what your goal and your production plan is. That way we can base it off that and have the best success.
I like it. Aiden, I appreciate you taking the time today. Yeah, and Josh for sparing you for an hour. Thanks for sharing what Thanks for sharing what you guys are talking about a little bit and what you and the customers are talking about. Really appreciate the time, and there's a lot of good information in here that hopefully some people are able to make use of. Yeah, thanks for coming to hang out around the fence post, and we will talk to you next time.
I appreciate.
As we wrap up today's episode, we hope something we shared helped you, challenged you, or gave you a new perspective. If even one moment stood out, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. That's how this community grows, one conversation at a time. You can find us as Around the Fence Post on Facebook and Wet Meadows Seed on Facebook and Instagram. We appreciate you being here. We'll see you next time, Around the Fence Post.